Hey guys, tonight we slip into the flickering torchlight of an ancient Chinese courtroom, where the air hums with tension and the faint clink of chains. You're standing on a cold stone floor, surrounded by stern officials in flowing silk robes, their eyes sharp as they size you up. The Emperor's justice looms like a storm cloud, and the punishments? Oh, they're anything but ordinary. Some so peculiar you'll wonder how anyone dreamed them up. Honestly, if you were facing these judges, you probably wouldn't survive the creativity of their sentences. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not just anywhere. You're in the heart of an ancient Chinese court, maybe during the Han or Tang dynasty, where justice wasn't just about law, but about spectacle, morality, and sometimes straight-up weirdness. The room smells faintly of ink and sandalwood, with scrolls stacked high on wooden tables. The judge, perched behind an imposing desk, glares down at the accused, who's trembling in thin linen, awaiting their fate. You can feel the crowd's anticipation. Their whispers like a breeze through bamboo. This isn't a place for mercy. It's a theater of order, where punishments are crafted to teach everyone a lesson, sometimes in the strangest ways possible. Let's set the scene properly. You're in a bustling capital, maybe Chang'an, where the streets outside throng with merchants and ox guards. But here in the courtroom, it's all about control. The ancient Chinese legal system, rooted in Confucian ideals and imperial power, didn't just punish to correct, it punished to awe. A mainstream fact to ground us: the legalist school, especially under the Qin dynasty around 221 BCE, pushed harsh penalties to keep society in line, believing fear was the glue of order. But here's where it gets quirky. Courts sometimes handed out punishments so odd they sound like they were cooked up in a fever dream. Ever heard of someone being sentenced to wear a giant wooden collar for weeks? Yeah, that's the king, and we'll get to that later. Trust me, it's as awkward as it sounds. You shift your feet on the stone floor, noticing the intricate carvings of dragons on the walls, symbols of the emperor's divine right. The accused, maybe a petty thief or a disloyal official, stands before the judge. You wonder what's coming. Will it be a whipping, exile, or something totally outlandish? Historians still argue whether these punishments were more about public spectacle or genuine moral reform. Some say the goal was to shame and deter. Others think it was about reinforcing the emperor's godlike status. Either way, you're about to see justice served with a side of peculiarity. Let's start with the vibe of the courtroom itself. You're surrounded by officials scribbling on bamboo slips, their brushes scratching like distant cicadas. The accused might have stolen rice or insulted a noble, crimes that seem minor to you, but are massive in this rigid hierarchy. Punishments here aren't just about pain. They're about sending a message. Take the 5 punishments from the Zhou dynasty around 1000 BCE. These are the backbone of early Chinese justice, including things like tattooing or amputation for serious crimes. But don't worry, we're keeping this PG-13. No gory details, just the strange stuff. For example, one quirky tidbit: some minor offenders were forced to wear heavy bronze masks shaped like animal faces, parading through town like a walking zoo exhibit. Imagine the embarrassment. Your neighbors pointing and laughing as you clank around with a tiger snout. Bet you'd think twice before sneaking an extra dumpling. You glance at the crowd. Their face is a mix of fear and curiosity. The judge's voice booms, listing the crime. Maybe tax evasion or disrespecting an elder. The punishment? Something called display in the marketplace. You picture the poor soul standing in the town square, maybe with a sign around their neck detailing their crime. Ancient China's version of a viral social media call-out. It's not just about the law. It's about making sure everyone knows their place. You can almost hear the marketplace chatter, the vendors pausing their sales to gawk. And here's a little joke to lighten the mood. Why did the thief hate court day? Because he knew he'd be the main attraction at the town's shame parade. As you stand there, you notice the judge's desk is piled with legal texts, like the Tang Code from the 7th century, one of the oldest surviving legal documents. It's a mainstream anchor for us. This code laid out punishments for over 500 offenses, from theft to treason, with eerie precision. But the quirky side? Some punishments involve forcing the guilty to perform public apologies in bizarre outfits, like wearing sackcloth dyed bright red to scream, "I'm messed up." You can't help but smirk. Imagine trying to keep a straight face while your cousin waddles through town looking like a walking chili pepper. The air grows heavier as the judge leans forward, his verdict imminent. You're starting to get why these punishments were so peculiar. They weren't just about the crime, but about the story they told. A thief might not just pay a fine. They might be sentenced to carry a massive stone tablet engraved with their misdeed. Picture lugging that through the village, your arms aching, while kids giggle and point. It's punishment as performance art. And here's another light jab. If you think your boss's team-building exercises are humiliating, try being the guy sentenced to sing an apology poem in front of the emperor's cousin. Historians still debate whether these odd punishments were effective. Did they really stop crime, or did they just make for good gossip? Some argue the public displays were genius. Nothing says don't steal like watching your neighbor waddle around in a bronze mask. Others think they were overkill, alienating people instead of reforming them. You're not sure where you stand, but you can't look away. The courtroom's tension is pulling you in, and you're curious about what's next. Will it be exile? A whipping? Or something so weird it defies imagination? You're about to find out, but for now, the judge's gavel falls and the crowd holds its breath. You take a step closer, the torchlight casting long shadows. The accused is led away, and you can't shake the feeling that this is just the beginning. These courts didn't mess around, but they also didn't do predictable. Every punishment was a lesson, a warning, and sometimes a straight-up spectacle. You're ready to dive deeper into this world of imperial justice, where the line between punishment and performance blurs. The next case is already being called, and you're hooked, ready to see what bizarre sentence comes next. You're still standing in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air thick with the scent of ink and nervous sweat as the next case unfolds before you. The torchlight flickers, casting eerie shadows on the dragon-carved walls, and you can feel the emperor's presence looming, even if he's miles away in his gilded palace. Remember that marketplace shame parade from the last case? Well, buckle up, because now you're diving into how emperors use their divine authority to dish out punishments so peculiar they'd make your head spin. This isn't just about keeping order. It's about making sure everyone knows the emperor's word is law, and his creativity and justice is as vast as the heavens. You're watching a new defendant, maybe a merchant who fudged his taxes, or a scholar who mouthed off about the emperor's policies. The judge, with his stern beard and silk robes, doesn't just sentence. He performs, his voice carrying the weight of imperial power. Here's a mainstream fact to anchor us. Emperors, especially during the Han and Tang dynasties, roughly 200 BCE to 900 CE, were seen as the son of heaven, their authority divinely sanctioned. Every punishment they approved, no matter how odd, reinforced their cosmic mandate. But here's the quirky bit. Some emperors got creative, sentencing people to things like reciting poetry in a squeaky voice in public or wearing bells that jingled their crimes to the world. Imagine the humiliation. You're trying to buy noodles, and your every step announces, "I'm a tax cheat," with a cheery little chime. The crowd around you murmurs, their eyes glinting with a mix of fear and amusement. You can't help but lean in, wondering what's coming for this poor merchant. The emperor's justice wasn't just about fixing the crime. It was about making a statement. You picture the emperor himself, lounging on a throne somewhere, approving a punishment list that reads like a bizarre theater script. One guy might be sentenced to carry a giant paper lantern painted with his misdeeds through the capital streets. Another might have to kneel for hours outside the city gates, holding a sign that says, I disrespected my elders. It's like ancient China invented the world's first viral public shaming campaign. Sorry, social media, you're late to the party. You shift on the cold stone floor, your legs tingling from standing so long. The judge reads from a scroll, his voice slow and deliberate, and you catch the word banishment. But this isn't your run-of-the-mill exile. Oh no, that's too boring for an emperor's court. Sometimes they'd send someone to a remote village with a twist, like forcing them to wear a hat shaped like a tortoise. A symbol of shame because, well, tortoises are slow and low to the ground. You can't help but chuckle. Imagine trudging into a dusty village, your tortoise hat wobbling, while locals whisper, "There goes the guy who thought he could outsmart the emperor." Talk about a bad day. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more about control or cosmic balance. Some say emperors used quirky penalties to show they could bend reality itself. After all, who else could make a grown man wear a tortoise hat and still call it justice? Others think it was practical, a way to avoid bloodshed while still scaring the population straight. You're not sure, but you're starting to see the emperor as less of a ruler and more of a director in a very strange play. The merchant in front of you looks pale as the judge describes his fate. He's to walk the city walls for a week, ringing a bell every 10 steps to announce his greed. You almost feel bad for him, almost. Let's pause for a quick joke. Why did the emperor love weird punishments? Because nothing says, I'm in charge, like making your enemies jingle their way to redemption. You smirk, but the reality is heavier. These punishments were calculated. The Tang Code, that legal masterpiece we mentioned earlier, didn't just list crimes. It prescribed punishments with an almost artistic flair. For minor offenses, you might be sentenced to sweep the emperor's stables while wearing a bright yellow sash that screamed thief. For bigger crimes, like plotting against the court, you might face something called lingering punishment, where you're paraded through multiple towns, each stop a new chance for humiliation. No wonder the crowd's so riveted. It's like watching a reality show, except the stakes are way higher. You glance at the officials, their brushes scratching away, recording every detail for the emperor's archives. The merchant's punishment is underway, and you can already picture him trudging along the city walls, his bell echoing in the dusk. It's not just about him, though, it's about everyone watching. The emperor's justice is a public affair, designed to remind you, the merchant and every farmer in the crowd that's stepping out of line comes with a price. And sometimes, that price is looking like the world's most miserable street performer. Here's another light jab. If you think your group chat roasts are brutal, try being the guy whose punishment goes viral in the village square. The courtroom's tension eases slightly as the merchant is let out, his head bowed. You can't help but wonder about the emperor himself. Was he cackling when he approved these punishments? Or was he just checking boxes on a very long to-do list? The quirky side of imperial justice makes you think he had a sense of humor, maybe a twisted one. One story floating around, possibly apocryphal, but too good not to share, claims an emperor once sentenced a corrupt official to carry a live rooster through town every day for a month, crowing his crimes at dawn. True or not, it's the kind of thing that sticks in your mind like a catchy but embarrassing jingle. As you stand there, the next case is called A Woman Accused of Spreading Rumors About the Court. You're starting to get the rhythm of this place. Every punishment is a lesson, a spectacle, and a warning rolled into one. The emperor's reach feels endless, his creativity boundless. You can almost hear the distant palace gongs, signaling another day of divine rule. The courtroom's shadows deepen, and you're pulled deeper into this world of imperial whims and peculiar justice. What's next? You're not sure, but you're betting it'll be weird, memorable, and just a little unsettling. You're still rooted in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and the faint rustle of silk robes as officials shift in their seats. The torches flicker, casting jagged shadows that dance like ghosts across the dragon-etched walls. You've just seen a merchant sentenced to jingle his shame along the city walls, a bell in hand. And now the courtroom hums with anticipation for the next case. You're about to dive into one of the most infamous tales of ancient Chinese punishment, the bamboo torture myth. It's the kind of story that makes you wince, but you're here to sort fact from fiction, to feel the weight of these peculiar penalties without losing your nerve or your lunch. The judge calls forward a new defendant, a wiry man accused of stealing from a temple. The crowd leans in, whispering about what's coming. You've heard the rumors about bamboo torture, that gruesome tale where criminals are supposedly tied over growing bamboo shoots that pierce their bodies over days. It's the stuff of nightmares, the kind of story you'd tell around a campfire to scare your friends. But as you stand here, you're starting to question whether it's real or just a legend spun to keep people in line. Let's ground this with a mainstream fact. During the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, courts relied heavily on physical punishments like flogging or amputation for serious crimes, as documented in legal texts like the Book of Han. Bamboo torture, though, that's where things get murky. Here's the quirky tidbit. While bamboo torture is a staple in modern horror stories about ancient China, there's little hard evidence it was a standard practice. Some accounts, mostly from later Western travelers or exaggerated chronicles, describe it as a slow, agonizing death where bamboo's rapid growth, up to a foot a day, did the dirty work. You picture the poor soul tied down in a field, the green tips of bamboo glinting in the moonlight, creeping upward. Creepy, right? But historians still argue whether this was ever a real punishment or just a spooky tale to scare rebels into submission. Some say it's a myth, amplified by outsiders' fascination with exotic punishments. Others think it might have happened in rare, extreme cases like for traders during the Warring States period. You shift on the stone floor, your sandals scuffing softly. The defendant in front of you doesn't seem destined for bamboo. He's more likely to get a flogging or exile, but the thought lingers. You imagine being out in the countryside, the air humid and buzzing with cicadas, tied down as the bamboo whispers beneath you. It's the kind of image that makes you glad you're just a visitor in this courtroom. Here's a little joke to ease the tension. Why did the bamboo punishment scare everyone? Because it was a real pain in the grass. You smirk, but the crowd's murmurs pull you back. They're not talking about bamboo. They're betting on whether this thief gets a public shaming or something weirder. Let's unpack this myth a bit more. You're picturing the logistics. Someone would have to tie the criminal precisely over young bamboo shoots, probably in a remote field, and guard them for days to make sure they didn't escape. Sounds like a lot of work for a court already busy with whippings and banishments. Plus, bamboo grows fast, sure, but piercing human skin? That's more Hollywood than Han Dynasty. You start to suspect this tale grew legs because it's just so vivid, perfect for scaring kids or warning would-be thieves. Instead, the real punishments were plenty creative without needing botanical torture. For example, temple thieves like this guy might be forced to wear a wooden placard listing their crimes, paraded through the streets to the jeers of onlookers. Less gruesome, but way more humiliating. You glance at the judge, his face stern as he reads the charges. The thief's hands tremble, and you can't help but feel a pang of sympathy. The courtroom's all about spectacle, and even if bamboo torture isn't on the menu, the punishment will be memorable. You recall that cane we mentioned earlier? Think of it like a portable pillory, a heavy wooden board locked around the neck. It's not deadly, but try eating noodles or sleeping with that thing on. It's like wearing a coffee table to a dinner party. And here's another quip. If you think your necktie's uncomfortable, imagine rocking a cane to the marketplace. The judge's voice cuts through your thoughts, announcing the verdict. The thief will wear a signboard and sweep the temple steps for a month. You exhale, no bamboo, just good old-fashioned public shame. But the bamboo myth sticks with you, a reminder of how fear can shape a story. Historians debate whether these exaggerated tales were spread by the courts themselves to amplify their power. After all, if you think stealing a temple candle might get you skewered by bamboo, you'd probably stick to praying instead. It's psychological warfare, ancient style, and you're starting to see how these courts played the long game. You notice the crowd's reaction, some nod approvingly. Others whisper about harsher punishments they've seen. The thief is let out, his signboard already being prepared, and you can't help but imagine him sweeping those steps, head bowed, under the watchful eyes of monks and passersby. The courtroom's rhythm is relentless. Another case is already being called. You're starting to get why these punishments, real or rumored, were so effective. They didn't just punish the body, they got inside your head, made you dread the consequences of stepping out of line. Whether it was a cane, a signboard, or just the threat of bamboo, the Emperor's justice was a masterclass in control. The torches dim slightly, and you feel the weight of the courtroom's history pressing in. You're not just watching a trial. You're witnessing a system that shaped an empire one peculiar punishment at a time. The bamboo torture myth, true or not, is just one piece of this strange puzzle, and you're curious to see what's next. The judge's gavel falls, and you lean forward, ready for the next twist in this saga of ancient justice. You're still in the heart of the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air thick with the scent of dust and ink, the torchlight casting long, wavering shadows across the stone floor. The last case, a temple thief sentenced to sweep steps in shame, has left the crowd buzzing, but you're already being pulled into the next chapter of this strange judicial world. Now you're stepping out of the courtroom and onto the dusty, windswept roads of exile, where the punishment isn't just about losing your freedom. It's about losing your place in the world. The loneliness of banishment is heavy, and you're about to feel its sting, along with some of the peculiar twists that made exile in ancient China a fate you dread almost as much as a bamboo myth. You're walking now, your sandals crunching on a gravel path leading out of the capital. The city's hum, vendors shouting, ox carts creaking, fades behind you as you follow an imaginary exile, maybe a disgraced official who dared criticize the emperor's latest decree. Exile was a cornerstone of ancient Chinese justice, a mainstream fact rooted in texts like the Tang Code, 7th century CE, which listed banishment as a punishment for crimes ranging from corruption to treason. Unlike a quick flogging, exile was a slow burn, stripping you of status, family, and community. But here's the quirky part. Some exiles were forced to carry symbols of their shame, like a wooden tablet engraved with their crime, dangling from their belt as they trudged to a distant frontier. Picture yourself hauling that tablet, every village you pass staring at your personal billboard of failure. The road stretches ahead, lined with swaying bamboo and the occasional farmer casting curious glances. You feel the weight of isolation already. No familiar faces, no comforting chatter of your neighbors. Exile wasn't just about distance. It was about erasure. You're sent to places like the malaria-ridden South or the freezing northern steppes, where survival is a daily gamble. And sometimes the court got creative. One odd punishment involved exiles being ordered to wear a single, oversized sandal, making every step a clumsy reminder of their fall from grace. You can't help but smirk. Imagine tripping your way into a border town, your one big sandal flapping like a sad flag. Here's a light joke. Why did the exile hate his new shoe? Because it was a step too far in public humiliation. You pause by a roadside shrine, its faded paint barely visible in the dusk. The exile's life is starting to sink in. You're not just away from home. You're a ghost, cut off from the social fabric that defines you. In ancient China, community was everything, tied to Confucian ideals of family and duty. Banishment didn't just punish you, it unraveled your identity. Historians still argue whether exile was meant to reform or simply remove troublemakers. Some say it was a second chance, a way to let offenders start over in a new place. Others argue it was a death sentence in disguise, given the harsh conditions of frontier regions. You're leaning toward the latter as you picture the endless road, the tablet clunking against your hip. Let's linger on that quirky sandal for a moment. You're trying to walk with dignity, but this oversized footwear makes you look like a clown who lost his circus. It's not random cruelty, it's deliberate. The court wants everyone you meet to know you're an outcast. No explanation needed. Other exiles might be forced to wear bright sashes or carry bells, like that merchant from the courtroom, ensuring their shame follows them like a shadow. You can almost hear the villagers whispering as you pass, their gossip sharper than any whip. And here's another quip. If you think airport security lines are bad, try hiking 1,000 miles with a sandal that screams, "I'm a criminal." The wind picks up, carrying the faint scent of pine. You're starting to understand why exile was so feared. It's not just the physical journey, though that's brutal enough with bandits, wild animals, and no TripAdvisor to guide you. It's the psychological toll. You're cut off from your ancestors' graves, unable to perform the rituals that keep your family's spirit alive in Confucian tradition. That's a big deal in a world where honoring your ancestors is as vital as breathing. Some exiles, especially scholars, wrote poems about this loneliness, their words preserved in collections like the Book of Songs. You imagine scribbling your own poem on a scrap of bark, your ink-stained fingers trembling in the cold. The road curves toward a distant mountain, and you picture the exile's destination, a remote garrison town, maybe near the Great Wall, where soldiers eye you with suspicion. The Tang Code specified different grades of exile. Some sent you 2,000 li, about 600 miles, away, others even farther. And the quirky punishments didn't stop at the journey. In some cases, exiles were assigned humiliating tasks, like cleaning latrines or guarding pigsties, their former status as officials or merchants reduced to a punchline. You wince, imagining a once proud scholar shoveling manure while locals snicker. It's like being demoted from CEO to janitor, except everyone knows why. You glance back toward the capital, now just a smudge on the horizon. The courtroom feels like a lifetime ago, but its judgments echo here. The emperor's reach is long, his punishments designed to linger in your bones. Historians debate whether exile was more merciful than execution, but standing on this desolate road, you're not so sure. The oversized sandal, the engraved tablet, the endless stairs, they're all part of the spectacle, just like the courtroom's shame parades. Here's one last joke to lighten the mood. Why did the exile write poetry? Because even the birds didn't want to hear his complaints. The sun dips lower, painting the sky in soft oranges. You're alone with your thoughts now, the exile's path stretching endlessly ahead. This punishment isn't just about where you're sent. It's about what you lose along the way. The courtroom's next case is calling you back, but the weight of this lonely road stays with you, a reminder of how ancient China turned justice into a slow, peculiar art. You're back in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the stone floor cool under your feet, the air humming with the low murmur of the crowd. The torches flicker, their light glinting off the polished wood of the judge's desk, and you can still feel the echo of that lonely exile's road in your bones. But now, you're stepping out of the courtroom again, this time into the bustling chaos of a town square, where the punishment isn't about sending you away. It's about keeping you right here, front and center, for everyone to see. You're about to witness the peculiar art of public shame rituals, where the goal is to make sure your misdeeds are the talk of the market for weeks. Buckle up, because this is justice served with a side of maximum embarrassment. You're standing in the middle of a crowded marketplace, the air thick with the smells of roasted chestnuts and sweaty bodies. Around you, vendors hawk their wares, kids dart through the crowd, and curious onlookers gather, their eyes locked on a figure in the center of the square. It's a young man, maybe a shopkeeper caught selling short measures of rice, and he's the star of today's shame show. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. Public shaming was a standard punishment in ancient China, especially during the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279 C, when legal codes emphasized social order over individual redemption. Courts loved making examples out of people, and nothing says don't do this like parading someone's mistakes for all to see. But here's the quirky twist. Some offenders were forced to wear paper hats painted with their crimes, like a dunce cap meets a scarlet letter, wobbling through the streets as the crowd jeered. Imagine trying to keep your dignity while your hat screams, "I cheated my customers." You edge closer, the crowd's chatter buzzing like flies. The shopkeeper stands on a wooden platform, his paper hat tilting in the breeze, the words dishonest scale scrawled in bold ink. His face is flushed, and you can't tell if it's from the heat or the humiliation. The judge's verdict wasn't just about punishment. It was about turning this guy into a walking cautionary tale. You notice the details. His hands are tied loosely behind him, not to restrain, but to make him look helpless, and a small bell hangs from his belt, jingling every time he shifts. It's like the emperor's court decided to double down on the embarrassment factor. Here's a quick joke to lighten the mood. Why did the shopkeeper hate his punishment? Because his new hat was way too much for his ego. The ritual unfolds like a Grim Street performance. You hear the official reading the charges aloud, his voice carrying over the market's din. The shopkeeper has to bow to the crowd every few minutes, each dip met with laughter or a tossed vegetable. It's not just about him. It's about the message. In ancient China, shame was a social glue, rooted in Confucian ideals of propriety and community. Mess up, and you didn't just wrong the law, you wronged everyone around you. The crowd's reaction is part of the punishment. Their jeers a reminder that stepping out of line costs you your place in the village's good graces. You can't help but wince, imagining yourself up there, your own mistakes broadcast for all to see. Let's linger on those quirky props. The paper hat is just the start. Some offenders were made to carry wooden signs slung around their necks, listing their crimes in humiliating detail. Others had to chant their offenses aloud, like a broken record of regret, while walking a circuit through the town. One particularly odd ritual involved forcing the guilty to wear a single red glove, bright as a festival lantern, to mark them as untrustworthy. Picture haggling for fish while everyone stares at your crimson hand, whispering about what you did. It's like being stuck in a group chat where everyone's roasting you, except there's no mute button. Here's another quip. If you think your bad haircut's embarrassing, try rocking a red glove that screams, "I'm a liar." Historians still argue whether public shaming was effective or just cruel. Some say it was genius. Nothing deters crime like the fear of becoming the town's laughingstock. Others argue it alienated people, making reform harder by cutting them off from the community they needed to rejoin. You're not sure where you stand, but watching the shopkeeper, you feel the weight of every stare. The Song Legal Treatise, a key legal text, shows how courts carefully choreograph these rituals, specifying everything from the size of the sign to the length of the parade. It's punishment as theater, and the crowd is eating it up, some tossing playful insults, others muttering about fairness. You notice a kid in the crowd, giggling as he mimics the shopkeeper's awkward bow. It's a reminder that these rituals weren't just for adults. Kids learned early what happened if you broke the rules. The shopkeeper's punishment will last a week, maybe two, depending on the judge's mood. Each day, he'll stand here, hat wobbling, bell jingling, until the town's had its fill. You can't help but think back to that exiled official with his oversized sandal. Shame follows the same script, whether it's in a marketplace or on a dusty road. The emperor's justice loves its props, its spectacle, its way of making sure you never forget your mistake. The sun climbs higher, the square growing hotter, and you feel a bead of sweat trickle down your neck. The shopkeeper's face is a mask of resignation now, his bow's mechanical. You wonder what he's thinking, regret, anger, or just counting the minutes until he can slink away. The crowd's starting to thin, some heading back to their stalls, but the lesson lingers. This isn't just about one shopkeeper. It's about everyone watching, everyone who'll think twice before cheating on their scales. Here's one last joke. Why do the market crowd love shame rituals? Because free entertainment beats buying overpriced rice. The official signals the end of today's display, and the shopkeeper is led off the platform, his hat still wobbling. You're left in the square, the buzz of the market picking up again, but the weight of what you've seen sticks with you. The courtroom's next case is calling, but this public stage, with its paper hats and jeering crowds, has shown you another side of ancient China's peculiar justice, a side that's as much about the audience as the accused. You're back in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air thick with the scent of wax and old scrolls, the torchlight casting a warm glow over the stern faces of the officials. The echo of the marketplace's jeering crowd still lingers in your mind, those paper hats and jingling bells painting a vivid picture of public shame. Now, you're settling into the courtroom's rhythm again, but the focus shifts inward to the ideas that shaped these peculiar punishments. You're about to explore how Confucian morals, the backbone of ancient Chinese society, wove their way into the court's sentences, turning justice into a moral lesson with a side of quirky flair. It's like the emperor's judges were part schoolteacher, part theater director, and you're here to see how they pulled it off. The judge before you adjusts his silk cap, his eyes scanning a new defendant, a young scholar accused of disrespecting his elders, a serious offense in this world. You can feel the weight of expectation in the room, as if the walls themselves are whispering about duty and harmony. Here's a mainstream fact to anchor us. Confucianism, which took root during the Zhou dynasty, 1046 to 256 BCE, and flourished under later dynasties like the Han and Tang, was more than a philosophy. It was the blueprint for society, emphasizing respect, hierarchy, and moral behavior. Courts used punishments to reinforce these ideals, ensuring everyone stayed in their lane. But here's the quirky twist. Some sentences were designed to literally teach the offender a lesson, like forcing them to memorize and recite Confucian texts in public while wearing a sign that said, "I forgot my manners." Imagine stumbling over the Analects while your neighbors snicker. That's next-level embarrassment. You lean against a wooden pillar, its carvings of clouds and cranes cool onto your hand. The scholar looks nervous, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his robe. The judge's verdict is coming, and you can tell it's going to be a performance. Confucian morals weren't just about following rules. They were about internalizing them, becoming a better person in the eyes of society. So, the court didn't just punish, they corrected. For minor offenses like this scholar's, you might be sentenced to copy passages from Confucian classics 100 times, your brushstrokes shaky under the watchful eye of a local official. It's like being sent to detention, except your homework is a 2,000-year-old philosophy text. Here's a light joke. Why did the scholar dread his punishment? Because nothing says, respect your elders, like writer's cramp from copying Confucius. The crowd murmurs, some nodding approvingly as the judge announces the scholar's fate. He'll spend a month teaching children in a village school, reciting Confucian principles daily while wearing a blue sash marked disrespectful. You can't help but smirk. Imagine this guy, who probably thought he was above it all, now leading a class of giggling kids through lessons on filial piety. It's punishment as education, and it's pure Confucian logic. The Book of Rites, a key Confucian text, stressed that proper behavior kept society in balance, and courts took that seriously. A disrespectful scholar wasn't just a problem. He was a threat to the cosmic order, and the court's job was to nudge him back into place, preferably with a dash of humiliation. Let's linger on that quirky sash for a moment. You picture the scholar trudging to the village, his blue fabric flapping like a flag of failure. It's not just a fashion faux pas, it's a public reminder of his mistake. Other Confucian-inspired punishments were just as creative. Some offenders were made to perform ritual bows to their elders every morning, their apologies echoing through the village square. Others had to donate rice or cloth to the community, a way of repaying their moral debt. It's like the court was saying, "You messed up, so now you're going to be the most virtuous person in town, whether you like it or not." Here's another quip. If you think your teacher's pop quizzes are tough, try acing a public apology with a whole village as your grader. Historians still argue whether these punishments actually reformed people or just made them resentful. Some say the Confucian approach was brilliant, using shame and education to realign offenders with society's values. Others think it was too heavy-handed, forcing people into roles they couldn't sustain. You're not sure, but watching the scholar's face, half defiance, half resignation, you can see the pressure to conform. The Tang Code we mentioned earlier often tied punishments to Confucian principles, specifying penalties that restored social harmony, like making a thief rebuild the community granary he stole from. It's justice with a moral agenda, and you're starting to see how deeply it shaped this world. The courtroom's atmosphere shifts as the scholar is led away, his blue sash already being fastened around his waist. You notice the officials exchanging glances, satisfied that another lesson has been set in motion. The crowd's whispers carry a mix of approval and amusement, and you can't help but think back to that shopkeeper in the marketplace, his paper hat wobbling under the crowd's gaze. Whether it's a sash or a signboard, these punishments are all about visibility, about making sure the lesson sticks. You're starting to get why Confucian morals were so central. They weren't just rules, they were the glue holding this society together. The torches flicker, and you feel a slight chill as the next case is called. You're still processing the scholar's fate, imagining him droning through Confucian text to a room full of restless kids. It's a punishment that's both absurd and profound, a perfect blend of the court's peculiar style. Here's one last joke. Why did the court love Confucian punishments? Because nothing fixes bad manners like a month of playing teacher's pet. The judge's gavel falls, and you lean forward, ready for the next twist in this saga of moral justice. The courtroom's rhythm pulls you deeper, and you're curious to see what other strange lessons these courts have in store. You're still standing in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air heavy with the scent of ink and the faint creak of wooden benches as the crowd shifts. The torchlight dances across the dragon-carved walls, and you can still picture that scholar from the last case, trudging off to teach kids while draped in his disrespectful sash. The courtroom's rhythm is relentless, pulling you into the next peculiar punishment, tattooed criminal codes. You're about to see how ancient Chinese courts turn skin into a canvas for justice, marking offenders with ink that told their story of shame long after the trial ended. It's a punishment that's both permanent and personal, and you're here to feel its weight. The judge calls forward a new defendant, a wiry man accused of theft. Maybe he swiped silk from a merchant stall. His face is tense, his eyes darting as the officials read his charges. You lean in, noticing the faint hum of anticipation in the room. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. Tattooing as punishment, known as CI or MO, was a formal practice in ancient China, especially during the Qin and Han dynasties, 221 BC, 220 C, as recorded in texts like the Book of Han. It was used for crimes like theft or desertion, marking the offender's face or arms with symbols of their crime. But here's the quirky twist. These weren't just random scribbles. Some tattoos were elaborate, like inked poems or characters spelling out the exact offense, turning your skin into a walking rap sheet. Imagine trying to buy dumplings with thief etched across your forehead. You shift on the stone floor, your sandals scuffing softly. The defendant's hands are clenched, and you can already guess what's coming. The judge's verdict is clear. The man will be tattooed with the character for robbery on his cheek, a permanent badge of his mistake. You wince, picturing the needle's sting, the slow drag of ink under torchlight. This isn't just about pain. It's about making sure everyone, from the market vendor to the village elder, knows what you did. The tattoo is a sentence you can't escape, a mark that follows you to every corner of the empire. Here's a light joke to ease the mood. Why did the thief hate his new tattoo? Because it was the one receipt he couldn't burn. Let's linger on this tattoo for a moment. You're imagining the process: a grim-faced official, maybe a former scribe turned tattooist, etching the character with a bamboo needle. The ink might be black or green, depending on the dynasty, and the design could be as simple as a single word or as complex as a phrase like "stole from the market." Some accounts, possibly exaggerated, describe tattoos shaped like animals, like a snake for deceit or a dog for disloyalty. You picture this guy trying to cover his cheek with a scarf, only for the wind to betray him at the worst moment. It's like having your worst mistake posted on your face for all to see, no filter needed. The crowd's whispers grow louder, some pointing at the defendant as he's led to a corner of the courtroom where the tattooing will happen. You notice the tools: a small bowl of ink, a bundle of needles, and a cloth to mop up the blood. It's not gory, but it's intense, and you're glad we're keeping this PG-13. The Tang Code we've mentioned before lists tattooing as a punishment for repeat offenders, a step below amputation but above flogging. It's a middle ground, less brutal than losing a hand, but more lasting than a public shaming in the marketplace. And unlike that scholar's sash, this punishment doesn't come off at the end of the month. Historians still argue whether tattooing was about deterrence or pure humiliation. Some say it was practical, a way to mark criminals so they couldn't blend back into society unnoticed. Others argue it was cruel, branding people as outcasts and making reform nearly impossible. You're not sure, but watching the defendant flinch as the needle touches his skin, you feel the permanence of it. The crowd's reaction is mixed. Some nod in approval. Others look away, maybe imagining themselves in his place. You think back to that shopkeeper with his paper hat. At least his shame was temporary. This guy's mark will outlive him. Let's add a quirky detail. In some cases, tattooed criminals were forced to live in specific neighborhoods, like ancient China's version of a bad side of town. You picture narrow alleys where everyone's got ink on their face, a community of outcasts trading stories of their courtroom days. It's a strange kind of solidarity, but it's also a reminder that the emperor's justice doesn't let you forget. Here's another quip. If you think your bad tattoo's embarrassing, try explaining thief to every new neighbor. The needle's steady rhythm fills the silence, and you can't look away, even though part of you wants to. The tattooing finishes, and the defendant's cheek is raw, the fresh ink stark against his skin. He's let out, head bowed, and you can already imagine him avoiding mirrors, dreading every glance in the market. The courtroom moves on, the next case already being called, but you're still processing the weight of this punishment. It's not just about the ink, it's about the story it tells, the way it reshapes a life. You recall that exiled official with his oversized sandal, stumbling along a dusty road. Whether it's a tattoo or a wobbly shoe, these punishments are designed to stick in every sense of the word. The torches dim slightly, and you feel the courtroom's rhythm pulling you forward. The judge's voice booms again, and you're ready for the next peculiar twist in this saga of justice. The tattooed man's fate is a reminder that in ancient China, punishment wasn't just a moment. It was a mark that followed you, a story written in ink for all to read. You're still in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air heavy with the scent of old scrolls and the faint tang of ink from that freshly tattooed thief's punishment. The torchlight flickers, casting restless shadows across the stone floor, and you can still see the raw mark on his cheek as he's led away. The crowd's murmurs linger, but the judge's gavel snaps everyone back to attention. Now, you're about to feel the weight of another peculiar punishment. The Kang, a wooden burden that turns everyday life into a public spectacle of shame. You're stepping into the world of this heavy, awkward device, and trust me, it's as uncomfortable as it sounds. Picture yourself standing in the bustling heart of town, maybe outside the courtroom or in a busy market square. The sun beats down, and you're surrounded by the chatter of vendors and the clatter of carts. In the center of it all is a woman, maybe a gossip who spread rumors about a local official. Around her neck is a kang, a large flat wooden board, like a table with a hole for her head, locked in place. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. The kang, or jia, was a common punishment in ancient China, especially during the Ming and Qing dynasties, 1368 to 1912 C, documented in legal records like the Ming Code. It was used for crimes like slander or petty theft, designed to humiliate while restricting movement. But here's the quirky twist. Some kangs were carved with the offender's crime in bold characters, so everyone passing by could read it like a billboard. Imagine trying to sip tea with a 4-foot wooden square around your neck, announcing, "I lied about the magistrate." You edge closer, the crowd's whispers buzzing like summer flies. The woman's face is flushed, her shoulders hunched under the kang's weight. Anywhere from 20 to 50 pounds, depending on the judge's mood. She can't sit properly, can't lie down, can't even scratch her nose without awkward maneuvering. You wince, imagining the ache in her neck after just an hour. The kang isn't just heavy, it's a daily ordeal, forcing her to shuffle through town, dodging stares and stray dogs. Here's a light joke to ease the tension. Why did the gossip hate her kang? Because it gave carrying your mistakes a whole new meaning. Let's linger on this device for a moment. You're picturing the kang's design. 2 wooden planks, hinged together, with a hole in the middle for the neck, locked with a metal clasp. Some were plain, but others were works of art. Grim art, but still. You imagine one etched with dragons or clouds, the crime painted in red or black ink. Slanderer of officials. The woman has to wear it for days, maybe weeks, eating and sleeping, or trying to, with this thing strapped on. It's like wearing a portable prison, except everyone's invited to gawk. You recall that shopkeeper with his paper hat from the marketplace. Same vibe, different prop. The kang's just a heavier, more permanent version of shame. The crowd around you is a mix of curious and judgmental. A kid tosses a pebble, not hard, but enough to make the woman flinch. You feel a pang of sympathy. She's not just carrying wood. She's carrying the weight of every stare. The Ming Code specified kang sentences for minor crimes, often paired with public exposure, like standing outside the city gate for hours. It's punishment as performance, and the audience is everyone you know. Historians still argue whether the kang was about reform or just deterrence. Some say it forced offenders to confront their wrongs publicly, encouraging change. Others think it was pure humiliation, alienating people from their communities. You're leaning toward the latter as you watch her shuffle, the wood creaking with every step. Let's add a quirky detail. In some cases, kang wearers were assigned tasks like sweeping the town square, making the punishment even more public. You picture her broom kicking up dust, the kang wobbling as she works, while passers-by whisper about her gossip. It's like being sentenced to community service with a neon sign over your head. Here's another quip. If you think your backpack's heavy, try hauling a kang through the market. The woman's eyes are downcast, but you catch a flicker of defiance. She's not broken. Not yet. It makes you wonder how many kang wearers went back to their old ways the moment the wood came off. The sun climbs higher, the square growing warmer, and you notice the woman's steps slowing. The kang's weight is relentless, and you can almost feel it on your own shoulders, pressing down. The crowd thins as people return to their daily routines, but her punishment goes on, a slow march through town. You think back to that tattooed thief, his cheek marked forever. The kang may come off eventually, but the memory of this public ordeal will linger, just like that ink. The Emperor's justice loves its props, whether it's a sandal, a sash, or a wooden board. Each one tells a story of shame. The official overseeing her punishment barks an order, and she shuffles toward the city gate, where she'll stand for the rest of the day. You're starting to see the pattern. These punishments aren't just about the crime. They're about the spectacle, the lesson etched into the community's memory. Here's one last joke. Why was the kang the worst accessory? because it never went out of style in the emperor's court. The courtroom calls you back. The next case already brewing, but the image of that wooden burden stays with you, a heavy reminder of how ancient China turned justice into a public art form. You're back in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air thick with the scent of burning oil from the torches, their light casting a soft glow over the stern faces of the officials. The memory of that woman in the town square, weighed down by her creaking cane, still lingers, its wooden bulk a stark reminder of the emperor's flair for public punishment. Now, you're about to feel the sting of a different kind of justice. Judicial whippings, where the court's calculated lash isn't just about pain, but about precision and message. You're stepping into a world where every stroke of the whip is measured, and the punishment is as much a performance as that wobbling cane. Get ready to wince, because this one hits hard, literally. You're standing just outside the courtroom now, in a dusty courtyard where the crowd has gathered, their whispers mingling with the chirp of distant crickets. Before you is a man, maybe a smuggler caught dodging taxes on silk, stripped to the waist and tied to a wooden post. His face is grim, and you can feel the tension in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. Whipping, or zhang, was a standard punishment in ancient China, especially during the Tang and Song dynasties, 618 to 1279 CE, as detailed in legal codes like the Tang Code. It was used for crimes like theft or tax evasion, with the number of lashes, anywhere from 10 to 100, carefully prescribed based on the offense's severity. But here's the quirky twist. Some whippings came with odd flourishes, like requiring the offender to shout their crime after each lash, turning the punishment into a public confession. Imagine yelling, "I hid the silk," while the whip cracks. Talk about adding insult to injury. You shift on your feet, the gravel crunching softly. The executioner, a burly man with a face like weathered stone, holds a bamboo rod, its tip flexible enough to sting without breaking the skin. The judge's clerk reads the sentence. 30 lashes for tax evasion, plus a public apology at the end. You wince, picturing the sharp snap of bamboo against skin, each strike a lesson etched in pain. The crowd watches, some with grim approval, others with uneasy glances. This isn't just about hurting the smuggler. It's about showing everyone what happens when you cheat the emperor. Here's a light joke to ease the mood. Why did the smuggler dread whipping day? Because it was the one time he couldn't hide anything. Let's linger on the mechanics of this punishment. You're imagining the executioner's careful aim, each lash landing with a precision that's almost artistic. The Tang Code was meticulous, specifying the rod size, about 3 feet long, an inch thick, and even the force of the strike to avoid permanent damage. This wasn't about brutality, it was about control. For lesser crimes, you might get a lighter slap with a flat board, almost like a stern spanking, but for something like smuggling, the bamboo rod was the star. And that quirky shout-along? It wasn't always required, but when it was, it turned the courtyard into a theater, with the offender as the reluctant lead actor, their voice hoarse by the 10th lash. The first crack of the whip makes you flinch, the sound sharp against the evening air. The smuggler grits his teeth, his shout of, "I evaded taxes," barely audible. The crowd's silence is heavy, broken only by the rhythmic snap of bamboo. You think back to that tattooed thief, his cheek marked forever, or the woman with her cane, wobbling through the market. Whipping is quicker, but no less public. Each lash a reminder of the emperor's reach. Historians still argue whether these punishments reformed or just deterred. Some say the pain and shame burned the lesson into the offender's mind. Others think it bred resentment, pushing people further from society's rules. You're not sure, but watching the smuggler's shoulders tense, you can feel the weight of every strike. Let's add a quirky detail. In some cases, the court would pause the whipping to let the offender drink water or face the crowd, prolonging the spectacle. You picture the smuggler, mid-punishment, handed a cup he can barely hold, the crowd murmuring as he stumbles through his apology. It's like the court saying, Not only will we whip you, we'll make you hydrate for round 2. Here's another quip. If you think your gym trainer's tough, try a whipping session with an emperor's executioner. The lashes continue, each one counted aloud by the clerk, and you notice the crowd's reactions. Some nod, others look away, maybe wondering if their one tax slipped from the same fate. The whipping ends, and the smuggler's led away, his back red but unbroken, his voice hoarse from shouting. The crowd disperses, some whispering about the next market day, others about the smuggler's fate. You're left in the courtyard, the post still standing, a silent witness to countless sentences. The song Legal Treatise mentions whipping as a middle ground punishment, less permanent than tattooing, but sharper than a cane. It's a balance of pain and spectacle, and you're starting to see why the court loved it. Quick, effective, and impossible to ignore. Here's one last joke. Why did the whip always win at court? Because it had the best snap judgments. The torches in the distance flicker, signaling the courtroom's next case. You're still processing the sting of that bamboo rod, the smuggler's strange shouts echoing in your mind. This punishment, like the others, is a story told in public, a lesson carved in fleeting pain but lasting shame. You're ready to step back into the courtroom, curious about what peculiar justice comes next, but the courtyard's dust and the whip's sharp cracks stay with you, a reminder of how ancient China made every punishment a performance. You're back inside the ancient Chinese courtroom, the familiar scent of ink and sandalwood wrapping around you as the torchlight flickers on the dragon card walls. The sharp crack of that smuggler's whipping still echoes in your mind, his hoarse confessions ringing like a grim melody. Now, you're slipping away from the public courtyard and into the shadowy corridors of the emperor's palace, where the stakes are higher and the punishments even stranger. You're about to uncover the peculiar penalties reserved for palace intrigue, those betrayals, whispers, and plots that threaten the imperial court itself. This is justice at its most dramatic, where every sentence is a warning to those who dare play games with power. You're walking through a maze of silk-draped halls, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and the faint clink of jade ornaments. You're following a defendant, perhaps a courtier accused of leaking secrets to a rival faction. His silk robes, once a mark of status, now seem like a mockery as he's led toward the emperor's private tribunal. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. Palace intrigues, especially during the Tang and Ming dynasties, 618 to 1644 CE, were treated with extreme severity, as recorded in texts like the Ming history. Betrayals, whether spying, plotting, or even gossiping about the emperor, could destabilize the court, so punishments were swift and symbolic. But here's the quirky twist. Some courtiers were sentenced to bizarre tasks, like tending the emperor's garden while wearing a chain of tiny bells that chimed their shame with every step. Imagine pruning peonies while jingling like a festive donkey. Humiliation fit for the palace stage. You pause by a lacquered screen, its phoenix carvings glinting in the lamplight. The courtier's face is pale, his eyes darting as the emperor's chief eunuch reads the charges. The tribunal isn't like the public courtroom. It's smaller, more intimate, but the tension is suffocating. The punishment for palace intrigue had to be precise. Too harsh, and you risk angering loyal nobles. Too soft, and you invite more plots. You picture the courtier, once whispering schemes in these very halls, now facing a sentence that's as theatrical as his crime. The verdict comes. He's to sweep the palace's outer courtyard for a month, draped in a plain linen robe with a scroll pinned to his back listing his betrayal. It's like being demoted from schemer to janitor, with the whole court as your audience. Let's linger on that scroll for a moment. You're imagining it flapping behind him, inked with bold characters, betrayed the emperor's trust. Every noble passing by will read it, their whispers sharper than any whip. The Tang Code we've mentioned before reserved special punishments for court crimes, often blending shame with labor to remind everyone of the emperor's untouchable power. Some courtiers were forced to carry lanterns painted with their misdeeds, lighting their own path to disgrace. Others had to recite poems of loyalty at dawn, their voices echoing through the palace while guards smirked. Here's a light joke. Why did the courtier hate his new job? Because sweeping the courtyard was a real dust-up with his ego. The crowd in this tribunal is smaller. Nobles, eunuchs, a few trusted guards. But their stares are just as heavy as the marketplace mobs. You notice the courtier's hands tremble as he's handed a broom, the scroll pinned awkwardly to his robe. This isn't just about cleaning. It's about stripping away his status, making him a spectacle for the elite. You think back to that woman with her cane, wobbling through the market. The palace's punishments are quieter, but no less public, designed to hit where it hurts: pride. Historians still argue whether these penalties deterred intrigue or just fueled more resentment. Some say they reinforced the emperor's divine authority. Others think they pushed desperate courtiers to plot harder. You're not sure, but watching this man's face fall, you can feel the sting of his fall from grace. Let's add a quirky detail. In some cases, disgraced courtiers were assigned to care for the emperor's pet birds. Feeding them while wearing silk gloves dyed a humiliating red. You picture this guy, once plotting in secret, now scattering seed for parrots while nobles snicker. It's punishment as performance art, and the palace is the perfect stage. Here's another quip. If you think your office drama's bad, try being the guy whose betrayal's broadcast by a jingling bell. The courtier shuffles off, his broom dragging, and you can't help but wonder how he'll survive the whispers of the court. The tribunal's lamps flicker, casting long shadows as the next case is prepared. You're starting to see the pattern. Whether it's a tattoo, a cane, or a scroll-pinned robe, these punishments are about making sure the lesson sticks. Not just for the guilty, but for everyone watching. The Emperor's Palace is a world of its own, where every misstep is a chance for a spectacle. You recall that smuggler's whipping, each lash a public warning. Here, the warnings are subtler, but no less sharp, cutting through pride and ambition. Here's one last joke. Why did palace punishment sting so much? Because nothing hurts like a demotion in front of the emperor's favorite peacock. The air grows cooler as you move deeper into the palace, the tribunal's tension lingering. The courtier's fate is a reminder that no one, not even the emperor's inner circle, is above the law or the emperor's creative justice. You're ready to step back into the broader courtroom, curious about what other peculiar punishments await, but the image of that scroll flapping in the palace breeze stays with you, a silent warning to anyone who dares to plot in the shadows. You're slipping out of the palace's shadowy corridors, the faint chime of that courtier's bells still echoing in your mind as you return to the familiar stone floor of the ancient Chinese courtroom. The air is thick with the scent of ink and wax, the torches casting their restless glow across the dragon-etched walls. The weight of palace intrigue, those scrolls and red-gloved bird keepers, feels like a world apart, but now you're diving into something even stranger, animal-based retributions. You're about to uncover how ancient Chinese courts used creatures, from snakes to oxen, to deliver punishments that were as bizarre as they were unforgettable. This is justice with a wild twist, and you're here to see how it unfolds. You're standing in the courtroom, watching a new defendant, a farmer accused of damaging a neighbor's crops, maybe by letting his pigs trample their fields. His weathered face is tense, his hands rough from years of plowing. The crowd leans in, their whispers buzzing like a swarm of bees. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. Animals were occasionally involved in ancient Chinese legal practices, particularly in symbolic or ritualistic punishments, as noted in texts like the Book of Rites from the Zhou dynasty, 1046 to 256 BCE. Courts used animals to reinforce moral lessons or deter future crimes. But here's the quirky twist. Some punishments involve forcing offenders to interact with animals in humiliating ways, like tying a thief to an ox cart and parading them through town. the beasts slow plodding a mocking mirror of their disgrace. Imagine being hitched to an ox, your neighbors chuckling as you're dragged along like a reluctant plow. You shift on the stone floor, feeling the coolness through your sandals. The judge's voice booms, announcing the farmer's sentence. He's to lead a pig through the village square every morning for a month, a sign around his neck reading, "I ruined the harvest." You can't help but smirk, picturing the farmer dodging the pig's muddy snout while the crowd jeers. This isn't just about shame. It's about tying the punishment to the crime, a nod to the farmer's own pigs that caused the trouble. The Tang Code we've mentioned before didn't explicitly list animal punishments, but local magistrates often got creative, especially in rural areas where animals were central to life. You're imagining the pig snorting, the farmer stumbling, and the whole scene looking like a bad comedy skit. Here's a light joke. Why did the farmer hate his punishment? Because his new boss was a real pig. Let's linger on this quirky setup. You're picturing the farmer in the square, the pig grunting as he tries to steer it past gawking vendors. Some animal punishments were even odder. Stories, possibly exaggerated, tell of thieves being locked in a cage with a snake, not to harm but to scare them into reform. The snake's slithering presence was a warning. Slink around like a thief, and you'll face nature's own tricksters. You wince, imagining the farmer's daily parade, the pig's tail flicking as kids toss straw at him. It's like the Kang we saw earlier, but with a four-legged co-star. The point isn't just humiliation. It's making the punishment fit the crime in a way the whole village will remember. The crowd's laughter grows louder as the judge adds a twist. The farmer must feed the pig from his own rations, a daily reminder of the crops he damaged. You feel a pang of sympathy. His family's probably already struggling, and now he's sharing his rice with a hog. Historians still argue whether animal-based punishments were effective or just cruel spectacle. Some say they were brilliant, using local resources like livestock to drive the lesson home. Others think they were over the top, alienating offenders without fixing the root issue. You're not sure, but watching the farmer's slumped shoulders, you can see the weight of this public ordeal, pig and all. Let's add another quirky detail. In some regions, offenders were made to mimic the animal tied to their crime. A poacher might have to crawl like a deer through the market, or a thief caught stealing chickens might cluck his apology aloud. You picture the farmer grunting like his pig, the crowd howling with laughter. It's punishment as theater, and the emperor's justice loves a good show. Here's another quip. If you think your job's embarrassing, try being the guy who has to oink his way through town. The farmer's let out, the pig's rope already in his hand, and you can't help but wonder how he'll face his neighbors tomorrow. The courtroom's rhythm pulls you back, the next case already brewing. You're still processing the image of that pig parade, a punishment as absurd as it is pointed. It's not just about the farmer. It's about the village, the lesson rippling through every onlooker. You recall that courtier sweeping the palace courtyard, his scroll flapping like a flag of shame. Whether it's a pig or a broom, these punishments are designed to stick in a mind. Here's one last joke. Why did the court love animal punishments? Because nothing says don't do it again, like a pig stealing your spotlight. The torches flicker, casting long shadows as the judge calls the next defendant. You're ready to dive deeper into this world of peculiar justice, but the farmer's muddy march, pig in tow, stays with you. It's a reminder that in ancient China, even the animals played a role in the emperor's grand theater of punishment, turning every misstep into a story the community would never forget. You're back in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air heavy with the scent of old parchment and the faint hum of torches casting their glow across the dragon-carved walls. The image of that farmer trudging through the village with his pig, a sign of shame around his neck, still lingers, its absurdity matched only by its sting. Now, you're stepping into a darker, more controversial corner of ancient Chinese justice, family punishment, where a single crime could ripple through an entire household. You're about to feel the weight of collective guilt, where the emperor's wrath didn't just strike the offender, but their kin, in ways that were as peculiar as they were unsettling. This is justice that hits close to home, literally. You're watching a new defendant, a middle-aged man accused of treason, perhaps for plotting against a local governor. His face is ashen, but it's the fear in his eyes, for his family, not just himself, that catches you. The crowd is quieter now, their whispers tense, as if they know this case is different. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. Collective punishment, known as lianzhua or implication, was a formal practice in ancient China, especially during the Qin and Han dynasties, 221 BC, 220 C, as recorded in texts like the Book of Han. If you committed a grave crime like treason, your family, parents, siblings, even distant cousins, could face exile, slavery, or worse. But here's the quirky twist. Some punishments were oddly specific, like forcing a traitor's family to wear mismatched shoes in public, one red, one black, to mark their shame. Imagine your whole clan hobbling through town, looking like they raided a mismatched laundry basket. You shift on the stone floor, the coolness seeping through your sandals. The judge's voice is low, deliberate, as he lists the man's crimes, conspiring against the emperor's representative. The verdict comes, and it's heavy. Exile for the man, but his family faces a month of public labor, cleaning the city's canals while wearing those mismatched shoes. You picture his wife and kids, their heads bowed, splashing through muddy water as passersby whisper. It's not just about punishment. It's about breaking a family's place in the community. Here's a light joke to ease the tension. Why did the traitor's family hate their new shoes? Because they couldn't step out of their shame. Let's linger on those shoes for a moment. You're imagining the family trudging to the canals, one foot in a red sandal, the other in black, their mismatched steps a constant reminder of their kin's betrayal. The Tang Code we've mentioned before allowed collective punishment for serious crimes, arguing that a traitor's disloyalty tainted their entire lineage. It was rooted in Confucian ideas of family responsibility. Your actions reflected on your kin, and their shame reflected back on you. But this quirky shoe detail, that was local flair, a way to make the punishment visible, memorable. You can almost hear the townsfolk snickering, pointing at the family's awkward gait. It's like the Kang or that pig parade, but with a whole family as the cast. The crowd's silence is heavy now, broken only by the scratch of the clerk's brush. You feel a pang of unease, imagining the man's kids, maybe no older than 10, dragging buckets of mud under the weight of those stairs. Historians still argue whether collective punishment was effective or excessively cruel. Some say it deterred treason by making the stakes personal. Others argue it was unjust, punishing innocents for one person's crime. You're leaning toward the latter, picturing a child in mismatched shoes, confused and humiliated for their father's mistake. The Book of Rights emphasizes family harmony, but this feels like harmony enforced with a sledgehammer. Let's add another quirky detail. In some cases, families were forced to perform public apologies, kneeling together in the town square while reciting their relative's crime. You picture the traitor's wife, her voice shaking, saying, "My husband betrayed the emperor," while her kids echo the words. It's punishment as a group project, and nobody's happy about it. Here's another quip. If you think family reunions are awkward, try one where everyone's wearing mismatched shoes and confessing your crimes. The family's sentence is set, and you watch as they're let out, the man's head bowed, knowing his actions have dragged his loved ones into the emperor's spotlight. The courtroom feels colder now, the torches flickering as if mirroring the mood. You're starting to see how far the emperor's justice reached, not just into markets or palaces, but into homes, tearing at the ties that held families together. You think back to that tattooed thief, his cheek marked forever, or the courtier sweeping the palace with a scroll on his back. Collective punishment takes it further, spreading the shame like ripples in a pond. The crowd's whispers pick up, some debating the fairness, others nodding in approval. Here's one last joke. Why did the emperor love family punishments. Because nothing says loyalty like making your whole clan walk in mismatched shoes. The judge calls the next case, and you're pulled back into the courtroom's rhythm. But the weight of this punishment lingers. It's not just about the traitor, it's about the kids, the wife, the cousins, all caught in the emperor's web. You're ready for the next twist in this saga of peculiar justice. But the image of those mismatched shoes clomping through the mud stays with you, a reminder that in ancient China, a single crime could mark an entire family, in ways as strange as they were harsh. You're still standing in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air thick with the scent of burning oil and the faint rustle of silk as officials shift in their seats. The weight of that family trudging through the mud in mismatched shoes lingers, a stark reminder of how far the emperor's justice could reach. Now, you're turning to a darker chapter, execution, the ultimate punishment in ancient Chinese courts. But don't expect a gruesome spectacle. This is justice delivered with a peculiar restraint, where even death is a carefully staged performance. You're about to witness how these executions balance terror with symbolism, leaving a mark on everyone watching. You're in a quiet courtyard just beyond the courtroom, the morning air cool and heavy with dew. A small crowd gathers, their whispers hushed as they watch a man, perhaps a rebel leader convicted of inciting unrest, kneel before a wooden platform. His hands are bound, his face calm but pale. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. Executions in ancient China, particularly during the Han and Tang dynasties, 206 BC, 907 CE, were regulated by legal codes like the Tang Code, which reserved death for crimes like treason or murder. Methods like strangulation or decapitation were common, but they were performed with precision to maintain the emperor's dignity. And here's the quirky twist. Some executions included odd rituals, like forcing the condemned to wear a white robe embroidered with their crime, turning their final moments into a public lesson. Picture a traitor facing the blade, draped in silk that screams, "I defied the Son of Heaven." You shift on the gravel, the stones crunching under your sandals. The executioner, a solemn figure in dark robes, adjusts a silk cord, the chosen method for this rebel. The crowd is silent, their eyes fixed on the platform. Unlike the whipping or cangue we've seen, this punishment is final, but it's no less theatrical. The white robe, fluttering in the breeze, is embroidered with characters for rebellion, a stark contrast to the man's calm demeanor. You can't help but feel the weight of the moment. Death is serious, but the emperor's court makes it a message. Here's a light joke to ease the tension. Why did the rebel hate his execution robe? Because it was the one outfit he couldn't talk his way out of. Let's linger on that robe for a moment. You're picturing the fine silk, almost beautiful if not for the grim context. Its characters bold and black, visible even from the back of the crowd. The Tang Code emphasized that executions should awe the public, not just end a life. Sometimes, the condemned were paraded through the city first, their robes a walking announcement of their fate. Other times, they were made to kneel for hours before the act, giving the crowd time to absorb the lesson. You think back to that pig-toting farmer, his parade a lighter shade of shame. This is the same idea, just dialed up to the ultimate consequence. A spectacle that says, cross the emperor, and this is where you end. The executioner steps forward, the cord taut in his hands. You look away, keeping this PG-13, but you can feel the crowd's tension, their breaths held as the moment nears. Historians still argue whether executions were about justice or intimidation. Some say they restored order by removing threats. Others argue they were propaganda, scaring the masses into submission. You're not sure, but standing here, you can see how the white robe, the careful ritual, makes this more than a death. It's a story told in silk and silence. The Book of Rites stressed harmony, and even executions were framed as a way to cleanse society, like pruning a diseased branch. Let's add a quirky detail. In some cases, the condemned were given a final task, like writing a poem of repentance to be read aloud before their death. You imagine this rebel, his hands shaking, scratching out lines about loyalty on a scrap of paper, knowing it's his last act. It's punishment as performance, even at the end. Here's another quip. If you think public speaking scary, try reciting a poem right before the emperor's executioner takes the stage. The crowd murmurs, some nodding, others clutching amulets, as the ritual unfolds with eerie calm. The execution ends quickly, the details spared, but the impact heavy. The crowd disperses, their whispers carrying the weight of what they've seen. You're left in the courtyard, the platform empty, the robe's embroidery burned into your mind. You recall that family in mismatched shoes, their shame shared across generations. Execution is solitary, but no less public, a final lesson for the living. Here's one last joke. Why did the emperor's court love a good execution? Because it was the one show that always had a captive audience. The torches in the distant courtroom flicker, calling you back to the next case. You're still processing the quiet power of this moment, the way death was dressed in silk and symbolism. It's a reminder that in ancient China, even the ultimate punishment was a carefully crafted spectacle, designed to echo long after the platform was cleared. You're ready for the next twist, but the image of that white robe, fluttering in the morning air, stays with you, a silent warning from the emperor's court. You're back in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the familiar scent of ink and wax mingling with the faint crackle of torches. The image of that rebel in his embroidered white robe, kneeling in the courtyard, still haunts you. Its quiet drama, a stark contrast to the bustling courtroom now. You're about to dive into a new question. With these peculiar punishments, tattoos, cangs, pig parades, meant to reform the guilty or just scare everyone else into behaving? You're stepping into the minds of the judges, the emperor, and even the offenders, pondering whether suffering could really change a person in ancient China. This is less about spectacle and more about purpose, and you're here to wrestle with the why behind the weird. You're standing near the judge's desk, watching a new defendant, a woman accused of forging documents, maybe to dodge taxes. Her eyes are defiant, but there's a tremor in her hands as the clerk reads her charges. The crowd's whispers are softer today, as if they're waiting for the next quirky twist. Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. The Tang Code, 618 to 907 CE, one of China's most detailed legal texts, framed punishments as tool for both deterrence and moral correction, rooted in Confucian ideals of restoring social harmony. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some sentences included bizarre reform tasks, like forcing forgers to write public letters of apology in perfect calligraphy, displayed in a market for all to critique. Imagine sweating over every brushstroke, knowing your sloppy handwriting could earn you extra days of shame. You lean against a carved pillar, its dragon's cool onto your palm. The judge's verdict comes. The woman must write her apology letter 50 times, each one posted in the town square, while wearing a sash labeled Deceiver. You picture her hunched over a desk, her brush trembling as she tries to perfect her characters under the village's scrutiny. This isn't just punishment. It's a test, a chance to prove she's learned her lesson. You think back to that scholar teaching kids in his disrespectful sash, his punishment a forced lesson in Confucian virtue. This feels similar, but with a creative twist, like the court saying, "You forged documents? Fine, let's see how you handle honest ink." Let's linger on that apology letter. You're imagining the woman in the square, her stack of scrolls piling up, each one a public confession of her crime. The Book of Rights, a Confucian classic, stressed that punishment should realign the offender with society's moral code, not just hurt them. But was it working? You're not sure. The woman's face is a mix of frustration and focus, her brush moving carefully. Some punishments, like this one, seem designed to rebuild character. Writing calligraphy demands patience, a virtue she supposedly lacked. Others, like that pig parade or the king, feel more about scaring the crowd than fixing the guilty. Here's a light joke. Why did the forger hate her punishment? Because her apology letters were the only thing she couldn't fake. The crowd murmurs, some pointing at the woman's sash as it's fastened around her. You can't help but wonder if this will change her, or just make her better at hiding her next scheme. Historians still argue whether these punishments reformed or merely deterred. Some say the Confucian focus on shame and self-improvement turned offenders into better citizens. Others argue the public humiliation just bred resentment, pushing people further from society's rules. You're torn, picturing the woman's careful brushstrokes. The Tang Code suggests reform was the goal, but that tattooed thief's permanent mark or the exiled official's lonely road make you question whether the court cared about second chances or just public fear. Let's add a quirky detail. Some reform punishments required offenders to perform good deeds, like donating rice to the poor while wearing their shame sash. You imagine the woman hauling sacks of grain, her deceiver label flapping, as villagers nod approvingly or snicker. It's like community service with a side of embarrassment, blending punishment with a chance to make amends. Here's another quip. If you think your volunteer shift's awkward, try handing out rice while labeled the town liar. The woman's sentence will last a month, her letters piling up, her shame on display. You wonder if she'll emerge humbled or hardened. Her brush strokes a silent battle between defiance and reform. The courtroom's rhythm hums on, the next case already being called. You're still processing this idea of reform through suffering, the way the court tried to reshape souls with sashes and scrolls. You think back to that family in mismatched shoes, their collective shame a heavy lesson. Whether it's writing apologies or sweeping courtyards, these punishments are about more than the act. They're about the story they tell to the offender and the crowd. Here's one last joke. Why did the court love reform punishments? Because nothing says change your ways like a month of perfect penmanship. The torches flicker, casting long shadows as the judge's gavel falls. You're starting to see the deeper game here. Not just punishing, but sculpting society one peculiar penalty at a time. The woman's fate, like so many others, is a mix of hope and humiliation, and you're curious about how these strange sentences shape the world beyond the courtroom. You're ready for the final chapter, but the image of those apology letters, fluttering in the market breeze, stays with you, a testament to the emperor's complex dance of justice. You're still standing in the ancient Chinese courtroom, the air thick with the scent of wax and the soft crackle of torches casting their glow across the dragon-carved walls. The woman with her stack of apology letters, her deceiver sash flapping, lingers in your mind, a symbol of the court's attempt to reform through peculiar shame. Now, you're stepping back to reflect on the bigger picture, how these strange punishments, tattoos, kangs, pig parades, and more, left a legacy that echoes beyond the emperor's reach. You're exploring how ancient China's quirky justice shaped not just its own time, but the way we think about law today. This is the final act, and you're here to see how it all ties together. You're in the courtroom, but your mind wanders to the bustling streets outside, where the lessons of these punishments ripple through markets, villages, and even distant frontiers. The judge calls a new case, a merchant accused of bribing an official. But you're more focused on the bigger question, what did all this mean? Here's a mainstream fact to ground us. The legal systems of ancient China, particularly the Tang Code, 618 to 907 CE, influenced later dynasties and even neighboring cultures like Japan and Korea, as their structured approach to punishment blended Confucian morals with imperial power. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some of the oddest penalties, like wearing mismatched shoes or reciting poems of repentance, inspired folktales that kept these lessons alive, turning criminals into cautionary characters in village stories. Imagine kids gathered around a fire, giggling about the merchant who jingled his shame with bells, a lesson wrapped in a laugh. You shift on the stone floor, the coolness grounding you as you watch the merchant fidget before the judge. His punishment, carrying a painted lantern listing his bribes through the capital, feels like a callback to every spectacle you've seen. The king, the tattoo, the pig parade. These punishments weren't just about the moment. They were designed to linger, to shape how people saw justice. You picture that merchant's lantern glowing in the dusk, its bold characters a warning to every passerby. The Book of Rights emphasized social harmony, and these peculiar penalties were like stitches in the fabric of society, holding it together through fear, shame, and sometimes reform. Here's a light joke. Why did ancient punishments stick around? Because they lit up the town. Literally, let's linger on those folk tales. You're imagining a storyteller in a village square, spinning a yarn about a thief with a snake tattoo, his inked skin a legend that outlived him. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were moral lessons, passed down like heirlooms. The quirky punishments, like that courtier feeding the emperor's birds in red gloves, became larger than life, their absurdity making the emperor's justice unforgettable. Historians still argue whether this legacy was about control or community. Some say these punishments strengthened society by making consequences vivid. Others think they sowed fear, creating a culture of obedience over understanding. You're not sure, but standing here, you can see how a lantern or a mismatched shoe could burn a lesson into a village's memory. The merchant's sentence is read, and you watch him shuffle out, his lantern already being prepared. You think back to that exiled official, stumbling in his oversized sandal, or the family splashing through canals in mismatched shoes. Each punishment was a story, a spectacle, a warning. The Ming Code carried forward the Tang Code spirit, and traces of these ideas, public shame, moral correction, appear in modern legal concepts like community service or restorative justice. You're starting to see the thread. Ancient China's quirky punishments weren't just about the guilty. They were about shaping everyone else, from the market crowd to the kids hearing bedtime tales. Let's add a quirky detail. Some villages held annual festivals where actors reenacted famous punishments, like a mock Kang parade, to remind everyone of the law's reach. You picture a performer wobbling under a fake wooden board, the crowd laughing but nodding, the lesson sinking in. Here's another quip. If you think history's boring, try watching a village reenact the pig parade. The merchant's lantern will join that legacy, its glow a story told and retold. You wonder if he'll reform, or if he'll just curse the court's creativity. Either way, his punishment will outlive him, woven into the empire's tapestry. The courtroom's rhythm slows, the torches dimming as the day's cases wind down. You're starting to feel the weight of this journey, from bamboo myths to execution robes, each punishment a piece of a larger puzzle. Here's one last joke. Why did ancient China's justice last so long? Because its punishments were too weird to forget. The judge's gavel falls, and you're ready to step out of the courtroom, carrying these stories with you, their lessons as vivid as the ink on that thief's cheek. Wind down. You're stepping away now, the courtroom fading into the soft haze of evening. The torches dim to a gentle glow, their flicker like a lullaby, and the air grows quieter, the scent of ink giving way to the calm of night. You've walked through markets, palaces, and dusty roads, seen justice served with bells, pigs, and painted lanterns. Each punishment, strange as it was, wove a story of shame, reform, or warning that held an empire together. You can almost hear the distant hum of a village square, a storyteller spinning tales of mismatched shoes under a starry sky. There's no need to fear these old courts now. They're just echoes, lessons carved in time. Let the weight of the day slip away, like a cane lifted from weary shoulders. Picture yourself resting by a quiet stream, the water's murmur washing away the tension of trials and crowds. Your eyelids grow heavy, the stories settling into dreams. Sleep comes softly, carrying you to a place where justice is just a whisper, fading into peace.